One of the biggest stories this week, of course, is Huw Edwards pleading guilty to, well, frankly, heinous crimes, basically having extraordinary paedophile images, including a video of a boy as young as 7 years old on his phone. Well, he will be sentenced in due course, but it's prompted a lot of front pages, not least The Sun. Huw Edwards' downfall, a picture of the BBC presenter, the man who was by our side through every royal wedding, every general election, even the Queen's funeral. He was the voice of the nation. And now the front page of The Sun saying clearly just one big word: guilty. He is indeed guilty. But would any of this story ever have come out if it hadn't been for The Sun newspaper and an expose last year of contact that he was having with a teenager who he was paying for explicit photographs, despite being a supposedly happily married father of 5 and, well, elder statesman of British television and of the BBC? I wonder. Well, let's put that question to Victoria Newton, who joins me now. She is the editor of The Sun newspaper that broke that extraordinary story last year. Although, Victoria, welcome to the studio. Interestingly, of course, you didn't name Huw Edwards. Headline, I remember, top BBC star in sex pics probe. BBC star said pants pic to teen. Suspended BBC man's panic calls to youngster. So many different headlines, but you never actually named Huw Edwards at the time.
No, we didn't. We thought long and hard about this story, with all sorts of issues with privacy, libel, everything we thought about, and also trying to protect the privacy of the youngster. Obviously, there was huge public interest in running this story because he was fueling a drug habit, and the parents that came to us were absolutely distraught.
Yeah. And that's the thing people forget.
This is what the story was about.
Well, look, let's have a little watch and listen of a little package we put together, sort of just giving people the timeline of this story and how we've learned perhaps the truth about the man that we saw on our television screens. Let's have a watch and a listen.
Who is this? Top BBC star in sex pics probe. Massive story on the front of The Sun. I think, A, the BBC, given the circumstances, owes it to licence fee payers to tell us. Be honest with us, we pay your wages.
Yeah. Second young person is alleging that this BBC presenter, who remains unnamed, got in touch with that young person using dating applications. Tonight at 10.
He's one of the BBC's highest profile and highest paid stars. Huw Edwards' wife has come forward to say her husband is the suspended BBC presenter.
And we mustn't use mental health as an excuse for his behaviour.
Let's talk right now about Huw Edwards. He arrived at Westminster Magistrate Court today and pleaded guilty to 3 counts of making indecent images of children.
I mean, it's a horrible, disgusting. I mean, I don't have the word to describe what Huw Edwards has been doing.
One day after the disgraced BBC News anchor pleaded guilty to receiving sex abuse images of children from a paedophile, the media landscape has shifted. Today, even The Guardian said The Sun's initial story feels more than vindicated.
It has been an extraordinary journey, has it not? Victoria Newton, editor of The Sun, still with me in the studio. So what was your reaction when you heard yesterday's guilty plea from Huw Edwards?
Well, I mean, I kind of expected it. Once we knew he was being charged, I thought he's probably got little choice here but to plead guilty. But having said that, you never know until it actually happens. So there were the gasps in our newsroom.
Yeah, I mean, because when you first exposed a major BBC star as having been involved in sending money in return for explicit pictures to a teenager, and then it emerged that Huw Edwards was the man involved, as such a figure that's been on our screens forever, a national sort of, just treasure. She was actually named by his wife, not by The Sun newspaper. The Sun was absolutely castigated, attacked from across the board for having opened, I suppose, a can of worms in terms of the story about Huw Edwards. What was it like when you've done a story which you knew to be true and you knew involved a vulnerable teenager, and you mentioned that his mother had been pleading with you, pleading with the BBC to stop Huw Edwards contacting their son, and yet you and your journalists, the newspaper, once again under attack for a true story?
That's right. I mean, people perhaps don't realise that we'd been getting information about Huw Edwards' behaviour going back to 2018. So we'd already seen patterns of behaviour some of those other stories that had come to us over that time, we didn't think raised the threshold of public interest enough to publish them. But when this story was presented to us, the parents were so desperate. They'd gone to the BBC 2 or 3 times, got nowhere. They'd gone to the police, got nowhere, no help. They're working class, ordinary people. And they felt that when they went to see the BBC, they were treated like a piece of dirt on the bottom of somebody's shoe. Yeah. So they came to us as a last resort for help, and we felt we had to give them a voice, and most importantly, we had to stop that money being paid to that teenager, and that's actually what we did. But of course, the whole world seemed to turn on us, because it was as if the liberal left couldn't understand that this man could be anything other than the great newsreader, a man of integrity. And of course,
BBC
he wasn't.
Good, Huw Edwards good, tabloids, The Sun especially bad.
Well, we knew, because of the history of the calls that we've been getting about him, we knew his patterns of behaviour. And of course, when we ran that story about the teenager, suddenly the phones went crazy with more people ringing in, and we built up quite a dossier of evidence, which we did then hand to the BBC.
So they have known for quite a long time this was not a one-off.
That's right. I mean, I have to say, however, I was still so shocked when he was charged with the level of what he was charged with.
Because this was very different, isn't it? I mean, these
Category A moving images of a boy aged 7 to 9. I cannot get over that.
No.
And why he then didn't do what any normal, decent human being would have done: you call the police.
Yeah, I mean, that is the extraordinary thing. He was sent these images, but again, a child has had to have been abused for those images to exist, and it's one of the things that campaigners and those who've had this happen to their children were so keen to stress is that, you know, this isn't a victimless crime. The child is often children almost abused to order for these images to be shared in paedophile groups, and this was sent to him by a convicted paedophile. You had Sarah Payne writing for you today. What does she have to say?
Well, exactly that. She'd echoed what you've just said, that at the heart of this are victims who are as young as 7 to 9-year-old boys who've been through horrendous experiences, perhaps still reliving that trauma now. We don't know how old these children were. Those images are still being shared. Yep. And it creates a market for them. And what he did in receiving that image and discussing it, as it's with the paedophile who sent it to him, was help keep that market going.
Yeah. Now, you know, you've been vindicated by, you know, by events. You've been vindicated, you know, even The Sun, so even The Guardian is saying, oh, you know, The Sun did a good job, you know, Newsnight and others. Does this show that, you know, the importance of the free press and the importance of, you know, papers like The Sun that can actually dig into these things, have the resources, and let's face it, you know, you have to have quite a lot of gumption to publish these sorts of stories.
Absolutely. Look, at the heart of this, if this for me is not vindication for me, there's not a day of vindication for me. This is about helping people in crisis and remembering those very young victims of Huw. There's probably many more out there that we don't know about as well. But, you know, this story did take some guts to publish. We had a brilliant news team, brilliant lawyers, and, you know, the fire that we came under was quite extraordinary, unlike anything I've ever witnessed.
But why do you think that was? Because there seemed to be a real sort of closing of ranks among the great and the good defending Huw Edwards.
Oh, you had, John Sopel, Emily Maitlis, Alistair Campbell, David Yelland. Many of those on the left came out slaughtering us. And they couldn't understand that you could have some behaviour that wasn't necessarily criminal, but morally wrong, somebody abusing their position of power and trust to then string along a very, very vulnerable teenager. They just couldn't understand that wasn't. And
there's big question marks about how much the BBC knew before. Again, the parents had already questioned this, but also how many other youngsters he had been harassing and bothering and asking for photos from, and his behaviour in the newsroom.
Right, well, there's a really interesting story published in the Sunday Times at the weekend, before anybody knew Huw was about to be charged, in which they revealed there's a whole new set of guidelines have been drawn up for the BBC's own staff, and it reads like a file in response to our dossier of here's the things you mustn't do in the workplace: harass junior members for dates and drinks and get shirty with them when they won't. He really
kind of basic stuff to most normal people, but
absolutely, the fact they had to spell it out is quite shocking.
It's a bit of a giveaway. And in terms of what the BBC we now know knew, so he's already gone off our screens. You know, as soon as your first, he was revealed as the man behind these messages to this teenager. He's then, we're told, seeking mental health treatment, and so suddenly it's all gloves. You know, no one's allowed to talk about this anymore. Then you're a bad person. And then we were told by the police there were no charges in relation to that. There was no criminal activity, although I think we'd all agree it was inappropriate, as you say, exploiting his position as a person of trust at the BBC in the nation's lives to do that. And then we know that he was arrested in November last year by the police in relation to these paedophile images. And yet the BBC were told, that because of his position as a journalist, we understand, they were told as his employer what happened. He was no longer on the BBC, but he was being paid his six-figure salary all that time. He didn't leave the BBC until April. During that time, he got a £40,000 pay rise. That's more than most people earn all year, not just their pay rise. And the BBC said nothing to anyone. We're told that BBC management didn't even tell BBC News.
That's right, they didn't.
What do you make of that?
Well, for a start, we'd heard the rumours. We were pretty certain they'd been arrested. We kept going to the Metropolitan Police. They refused to confirm or deny anything, completely stonewalled, as did other journalists, other crime reporters. We went to the BBC, stonewalled. So there was definitely... The authorities tried to keep this quiet.
Do the media have a right to know that someone in the public eye has been arrested?
Often there's really, especially with crimes like this, often the only way you can get them to court and get them proven is if you get more victims coming forward. So it benefits society to have open justice and have...
I can remember the BBC being quite happy about putting a helicopter above Cliff Richard's home when his house was searched. He was never even arrested.
That's right, yeah.
Let alone charged with the crime.
It shows how difficult it is for journalists to sort of break these stories. But the real issue for the BBC now, as you've said, is not only did they continue paying him, but they gave him a pay rise. And what I think the BBC's own staff are furious about today, and yesterday when the BBC put out that statement, was this was a huge error of judgment. Why, when the BBC knew the seriousness of the crimes that he was being investigated for, did they continue to pay him and give him the pay rise, knowing how horrific those potential crimes were? Innocent until proven guilty, of course, but there's a judgment call there, and they probably decided to stick with the view of HR managers and employment lawyers who would say, well, you can't do this and you can't do that, but sometimes you have to take a judgment call, and that's why Lisa Nandy has called in Tim Davie today. Yeah, absolutely. What do you want to see from the BBC now? Because, I mean, you think back to Rolf Harris, you think back to Jimmy Savile, when they were busy covering up Jimmy Savile's activities while he was alive, and even after he was dead. Journalists at the BBC who wanted to expose Jimmy Savile were basically lost their jobs at Newsnight because and people who exactly those people got promoted. Do you think this shows any evidence that lessons have been learned? Well, clearly not. I mean, definitely what I can see from all of this is there was a blind eye turned to Huw's office behaviour. He was definitely harassing junior members of staff, and he had this sort of... He was such a big, powerful man that if anything was raised about his behaviour, it was brushed under the carpet. I'm not saying that Tim Davie got to know about all this stuff, by the way. I don't know how much stuff ever got escalated to him.
But people may have felt that they couldn't escalate it because they didn't feel it anyone would take it seriously.
People worried about their careers and the impact it might have on that. So I think that's definitely been an issue for the BBC, and they're obviously trying to rectify that. Yeah. But they're going to have to deal with the anger in their own newsroom at the moment about the amount of money he was being paid and continue to being paid, and this is licence fees payers' money.
Well, it's our audience right now. It's Sun readers, it's talk radio audience, being forced to pay someone's wages when their bosses knew that there were these serious crimes that were being alleged at that time, and now he's pleaded guilty to them. I mean, it's been a year. It was amazing. It's almost a year to the day of the charges being made that you'd actually, raised this story. This does show that, there are some very powerful people, often very famous people, very rich people, who are getting away with wrongdoing because people feel they can't speak up. This is where the free press, this is where the tabloids in particular come in, isn't it, in terms of the role of being the voice of, the little people, the people like the family of the teenager who originally came to you and you were the only people who listened. And and the role of people being able to speak up about this stuff against the powerful to expose this wrongdoing and hopefully prevent future wrongdoing. Because as you said, it's not just like the teenager who he was messaging and he was paying money to fuel his drug habit, and vulnerable teenager. It's also the children who were in those videos, and he's pleaded guilty to looking at it. He asked someone to send him videos.
And he didn't call the police.
Someone sent me a video of a 7-year-old being sexually abused. Pretty sure my first call would be to the police.
999, yeah.
Exactly. And so this isn't really about just the BBC or just The Sun or just Huw Edwards. It is about young people, children, teenagers who are being abused, who are being exploited, and making sure that we can try and stop it.
That's right, yeah. That's what we will continue to aim to do. We've worked for many years trying to protect women and girls from violence with various charitable stuff we do, but this story was so important, I think, and often it takes a newspaper with the resources that we have to really commit to that, but it's not easy when you have many powerful forces trying to stop you doing that, including a lot of things.
Just finally, look, I know it's not about the Sun, not about you today, it's about, you know, but is it nice to be vindicated? Is there a feeling of satisfaction, at least, that we did the right thing?
Satisfaction that justice will now be done on behalf of those victims is all I felt yesterday.
But the Labour Party and the Labour government seem to be hell-bent on just annoying everyone and making statements and making judgments on things which are all completely against what the British people want.
Well, the problem is the economic situation was already bad. We have the highest taxes for 70 years. The government is spending almost half of the national income. The civil service has ballooned in size. And we were already in a situation, this is what I tried to stop back in 2022, of taxes were going higher and higher, businesses were closing down, people are leaving the country. We've got the highest rate of millionaires leaving the country of any country in the world. And what Labour seem hell-bent on doing is making it even worse. So putting the taxes up by 35 billion, making the net zero rules so tough that it kills business because they can't get cheap energy. And we've seen the steel industry go under, we're seeing refineries go under, and you know, I fear this is just the start of the pain. You know, it's going to be a very painful day, but what will happen is because the taxes are going so high, it will stop businesses investing in this country. And what we'll find is next year, Labour want to come back for more. And that is really frightening for our country.
Because they just want to keep feeding the beast, don't they? Because they keep saying there's no money, there's a £22 billion black hole, suddenly it becomes a £40 billion black hole, and yet they then continue to spend money where they want to spend it. For example, giving public sector pay rises, you know, the net zero commitments, as you say. And it's going back to the 70s, it seems to me. I mean, I'm old enough to remember the 70s, unfortunately.
But the difference is, in the 70s, we had very powerful unions and an inefficient manufacturing sector. Now we have a very powerful bureaucracy, and they are in charge. The Bank of England, the Office of Budget Responsibility, I know, I've been there. These are the people dictating the policy. And until we actually wrest control away from those bureaucrats and start holding politicians to account, we're not going to fix any of these problems, because all they want to do is they want to increase their power. And that means that if you're a small businessman trying to employ people, you get raided just to feed the ever-growing public sector. And that Labour of public sector people, you know, Rachel Reeves worked at the Bank of England. We don't know exactly what job
she made
she
the
did.
Tea by the sound of it, didn't she?
But she did work there. You know, she is part of them.
But it's not as an economist, though, which you are.
Well, exactly, but she is part of that bureaucratic mindset. Keir Starmer is part of the former DPP, part of that bureaucratic mindset. They cannot think beyond feeding the public sector, and we are killing our economy. I mean, we now have the most expensive energy prices in the entire developed world. How on earth can you run a manufacturing business in this country when your energy prices are 4 times the energy prices in the United States? And what we're not hearing about from Labour is things like fracking. You know, this is what we need to actually get our economy going. Cheap energy, low costs, make it easy to employ people. They're doing the opposite. They're making it harder to employ people. They're pushing up the energy costs with net zero, and they are making it very, very difficult to go out to work and run a business in this country. And they said they weren't going to hit workers. What we've heard so far of all the leaks from the budget is £20 billion is going to be on employers' national insurance.
Yeah.
I mean, who do they think are doing those jobs?
Exactly
I
right.
thought they were workers.
And also the minimum wage business as well. I was talking to a restaurateur the other day who said, look, I don't get paid that much money myself. I run the business. I probably take home about, after tax, 25,000 quid. He said, I'm going to be giving people more money than that who work for me because of government regulations, and I'm going to have to contribute more national insurance on their behalf. So in a way, it's probably not worth me keeping the restaurant open. I might just shut it. And those are the kind of conversations people are having.
It's very, very depressing, and we are now in an economic doom loop. And my fear is that we are going to end up where we did in the 70s.
Yeah,
the country will run out of money. We will end up having to go to the IMF for a bailout. That is how bad.
Just like Dennis Healey did. Who famously said, by the way, that the job of Chancellor is not something a woman should do. Do you remember that?
Well, he wasn't particularly great either.
He wasn't.
Was he?
No, he was hopeless. No, shortly after he said it, he went begging to the IMF.
I think we've got equal opportunities for women and men to be bad chancellors.
Yes.
That's what we have.
Well, I don't think Rachel Reeves
is a terrible chancellor.
Yeah.
So was Dennis Healey.
Right. It doesn't matter whether she's a woman, though. But Keir Starmer was making this out to be like the greatest, sort of discovery of the age.
This is the problem with the Labour Party. They're obsessed with identity politics.
Yeah.
They're obsessed with, are you a woman? Are you a man? Are you black?
Right.
This is not what drives Britain forward. What we should care about is people's talents, their ability to get things done, and that is irrelevant in the modern Labour Party. They throw money at the areas where there is no prospect of any economic growth.
Yeah. You've talked before about a kind of a mystery blob that exists behind the scenes where everything's run by civil servants, the Bank of England, that kind of thing. Jeremy Hunt the other day said that the OBR was biased. I mean,
better late than never from Jeremy Hunt.
Yeah, I mean,
better late than never.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, I thought he was part of all of that. But I mean, what is the point of the Office of Budget Responsibility now?
Well, what happened, and this was under Osborne, but Blair also outsourced a lot of power, is the power to forecast what taxes will do, what spending will do, was outsourced to the Office of Budget Responsibility, which means there is no room for political judgment about what is going to happen when you raise taxes. I believe, for example, that raising corporation tax to 25% was a massive mistake because all that's happened is companies have left Britain, less money has come in. But the Office of Budget Responsibility didn't agree with that, and they had the power, not me. So I was not able to change what we were forecasting. The Office of Budget Responsibility was making those decisions. And if politicians aren't making the decisions, and instead they're being made by faceless bureaucrats no one's heard of, the public are going to say, what's the point of voting for you?
Right.
Because you're just going in office, you're taking dictation from these people, and this is what is happening to Rachel Reeves. They are saying this is the amount of money this will raise, this is the amount of money that will raise. They are saying that if you do things like fracking, it's not actually going to bring any income into the country, therefore we're not going to score it on our scorecard, and it limits the room for manoeuvre of politicians. I think it's been a disaster. Ever since the Office of Budget Responsibility came into being, Britain's national debt has grown exponentially.
Yeah. And what do you make of this?
What have they succeeded in doing?
Yeah.
Absolutely nothing.
But also, what have you made of this ridiculous notion that we can take the debt and just call it something different, and then it's no longer debt? I mean, I said it's a bit like me going down to the bank and saying, that mortgage I've got, can you just call it something else? I'm not going to give you any money for that.
It's
give me some more money.
It's absolute nonsense.
Yeah.
It's totally irresponsible, and ultimately the government will be caught out. But the fact that the OBR is going along with all this tells you what you need to know.
Yeah.
Because whenever you hire somebody in the government, what do they want? They want more government. They want more power, they want a bigger budget, and they want to hire more people.
Yeah.
So she's now opening an office of value for money. What are those people going to do?
I know.
Those people are going to hire more people in the office of value for money, and then they are going to try and expand their empire, and they're not going to improve value for money. They're going to make it worse.
Well, they're going to make it more expensive as well, which is sort of counterintuitive, isn't it? Let's talk about Southport, because this story broke late yesterday. We may have questions about why it broke late yesterday, because it may be that the government didn't particularly want anybody to do anything with it, which they got that wrong as well. It was on front pages of all the papers. You were Prime Minister. Is it possible in any way, shape or form that Keir Starmer didn't know about these facts about the suspect in Southport at the time when, say, Yvette Cooper, the day after, was making a lot of noise about misinformation and the dangers of people saying things?
I would find it extraordinary that he did not know what was going on. If you think these materials were found in the suspect's house, that must have happened fairly soon after the appalling atrocity that took place in Southport. So I find it extraordinary that he wouldn't know those things, and it seems that the public has not been told the truth about what happened. And the whole narrative that has been allowed to develop that somehow Britain has a problem with the far right, but we don't have a problem with Islamist terrorism, is the public don't believe it.
No, of course they don't.
People know that's not true.
Right.
And it erodes trust in politics, it erodes trust in the machinery of government, because it's not just the politicians we're talking about here. It is the police, it is the intelligence services, it is the CPS. But it seems extraordinary that it should only come out now.
Yeah. And who would make that decision? I mean, would it be, say, for example, in your role as the Prime Minister, would the head of the DPP come into you and say, I don't think we should let this information go to the public, or would it come from higher up? Would it be Keir Starmer saying to the DPP, I don't think we should let this information out? How does that work?
I mean, the main dealings I had was with overseas intelligence and what happened and what would be released, and it would be something that would be agreed. But something like that is so explosive, one would assume it would go up to prime ministerial level, and ultimately they would have that authority, and it would be agreed with the security services, it would be agreed with the police. But this extraordinary gap of 3 months in terms of telling people what had gone on, it seems...
It's very odd, isn't it?
It seems odd, and if it's not sinister, Keir Starmer needs to say what happened now.
You're right.
He needs to tell people what happened.
Yes. And also, we still get people asking the question about the other CPS problem, which is the Manchester airport attack, which has now been 3 months or more since that happened, where everybody saw very clearly police officers being assaulted, seriously assaulted. One of them, I think, got a broken nose. The two men involved in that have still yet to be charged. The CPS is still considering what to do. And you have to wonder whether that's a similar situation. And you have to ask the question, is the CPS now fit for purpose? Is it now so politicised that it can't do its job?
I think we have a very serious accountability problem in the criminal justice system. This dates right back to Tony Blair's government, where, again, a lot of responsibility that used to lie in the hands of politicians was outsourced. The decisions for appointing the senior judiciary used to be made by the Lord Chancellor. They were then outsourced to a quango. So what has been created in the British state is a myriad of all these different organisations, and too often nobody knows who's actually responsible for what. They're unaccountable, they're very opaque, and these kind of answers like, we are still working on it, can be passed around the system for months, and it does not work. And every aspect now of British life, whether it's criminal justice, whether it's immigration, where we have similar problems, whether it's the economy, where you've got the problems of the Office of Budget Responsibility and the Bank of England, or whether it's climate change, where it's all outsourced to the Climate Change Committee, who are deciding the carbon budgets that we've all got to live our lives by. All of those things are outside political governance, and that is...
And I think that's partly why people have lost faith in politicians, because they don't see them having any influence, really, necessarily, apart from a bad influence.
That is basically correct.
Yeah. And the Conservative Party, of course, have been kind of in what you might call kind of treading water facilities for the last several months.
I think this leadership election has certainly gone on for far too long.
It really has. But, I mean, does it matter who becomes the next leader on Saturday?
I think the most important thing is the Conservative Party recognise what went wrong for the last 14 years. And I have not heard enough discussion about that. The fact is that we were in power for 14 years, yet all of the problems we've just been talking about, the criminal justice system, the economy, we did not reverse what Tony Blair had done. We left in the Tony Blair institutions, which have been captured by the left. They've been captured by left-wing ideology, whether it's the climate change zealots, whether it's the human rights obsessives, whether it's the wokery. They captured the institutions, and we did not change that. So we ended up in a situation, leaving office, of having record immigration, the highest taxes for 70 years. Yeah. And to me, the Conservative Party has not done enough soul-searching about how on earth we allowed that to happen. And that's what, to me, unless we're able to explain that to the public, why on earth would they give Conservatives a second chance?
And people would say, of course, you were part of some of those cabinet meetings, or some cabinets before you were Prime Minister, you had some very senior roles. What were you doing to try and change that? Because they'll say, well, hang on, surely you were in charge, or you were in charge of departments. Did you find it particularly difficult to get anything done?
I did. You know, I was fighting lots of battles. I fought battles to get trade deals done, like the Australia deal, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. I fought a battle on self-ID. You know, I was the minister who stopped the bill, which would have made it possible for men to say they were women without any medical checks. But I had a massive battle inside the Conservative Party about that. So what has happened is too much of the Conservative Party had adopted the left's beliefs because they thought that was the best way of getting on. So Conservatives in the Conservative Party spend a hell of a lot of time in government fighting to get some quite basic stuff through. I mean, who'd have thought we were arguing that what a man or a woman was?
Yes.
Who'd have thought we'd argue?
Well, you might say the Tories were captured in a way, weren't they, by the kind of the wets, if you like, or what they used to be called.
Well, the Tories, there were too many people in the Conservative Party who cared more about being in with the liberal elite, you know, being popular at dinner parties, getting a good corporate job after they left office, working on net zero or whatever other, you know, job was popular in corporate circles. They were more concerned about that than they were about actually delivering for the public, and that was a huge problem for us.
Absolutely. Finally, Donald Trump, less than a week to go now, until you spent a lot of time in America, I know. I think he's going to win. What do you think?
I believe he's going to win. I hope and pray he is going to win. He is part of turning around the problems we have in the West, because all the things we've been talking about that have infected Britain and are pushing our country in a direction of decline, they have the same problems in America. The same ideology, the woke gender ideology, the Keynesian economics. You know, Biden is spending like there's no tomorrow. We've got a problem with debt, but so have the Americans. And that all needs to be turned around. And I think Donald Trump is the man who can take on the system in America. And that's what needs to be taken on. It's not just a debate between left and right. They have a problem with the system too, and he will take them on.
Liz Truss, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Mike.
Good to see you.
Let's talk now to someone I've spoken to before, Aviva Siegal. She is a former hostage, and Hamas held her after the 7th of October. Hamas terrorists held her for 51 days. It is the anniversary of that kidnapping, the 7th of October, when so much horrendous terrorism occurred. Aviva, thank you for joining me again. I appreciate that, and I wonder, as you look forward to tomorrow and the commemoration of what happened that dreadful day, I know your husband Keith is still held by Hamas terrorists as well. You were held yourself for 51 days. What are your thoughts today, Aviva?
I can't believe that a year has passed. I can't believe that Keith and the hostages are lying on a filthy, dirty mattress and just knowing and waiting for the next terrible thing to happen to them. To be starved, to be touched, to be raped, to be tortured, to be starved, and knowing that Keith and the hostages are there for a year. They're still there since the 7th of everything that happened in such a brutal way, and the Hamas terrorists are keeping them in such a brutal way because I was there and I was treated like dirt. And I know by the 6 hostages that came back a month ago. Their conditions were so bad. They lost half of their body, and they were shot, and they were treated in such a brutal way. So I'm so worried about Keith and the hostages that are still there. My heart is broken.
There are 101 people still held by Hamas terrorists. What is your message to Hamas today, apart from quite simply release them now?
I think that a year is too much and too long. There are people that died there slowly, and I do not want to think about Keith dying there slowly underneath the ground with no oxygen and no food and no water in terrible conditions. Keith is 65 years old, and he does not deserve to be treated like they treated me and to still be in that situation.
How has
I'm asking, I'm begging, let the hostages free. They need to come back to their country. Keith and I were taken with our pajamas from our house, and it should not be like that. And what they're going through is the cruelest thing ever. The cruelest thing ever. I was there. I felt exactly what they're going through. I was underneath the ground with no oxygen, and I was sure that I'm going to die. I just prayed to God that I die before Keith. And I know that Keith is there, just trying to keep himself alive. And my heart is just broken up into pieces.
Aviva, what has the last year been like for you? How have you changed as a person because of your captivity, the horrendous conditions that you were held within, and being released and knowing that your husband is still there?
The last year has been the worst year. The time that I'm going through is the worst that I can go through, knowing that Keith is still there and the hostages are there in the situation that they are in. I'm the saddest person in earth. And, I need to be strong for my family, for my grandchildren. I don't want to break their hearts every time they look at me. So I'll do everything I can to keep strong. And I'm going to continue screaming and shouting for the hostages that are still there. But it's been the worst that anybody can imagine. Can you imagine your wife being underneath the ground and not even knowing if she's alive, or not even knowing if she's been tortured or been raped? I don't think so. It's just beyond anybody's thoughts. It's the cruelest thing ever for us as humans to leave humans there underneath the ground with no oxygen and no food and no water while they tortured and raped. And the Hamas terrorists do whatever they want to, when they feel like it. And you just feel like the only thing you try to do is to keep alive.
Aviva, I don't want to get into politics with you. I don't want to ask you a political question, especially today. But what I do want to ask you is that there are people around the world, including here in the United Kingdom, who would support people who have done those things to you and to Keith, who support Hezbollah, who support Hamas, who are the terrorists who held you. What would you say to them today?
Would you want your loved ones to be underneath the ground and treated like that? I don't think so. I'm sure that you wouldn't want, because us as humans always care about others, and we care if they get a little scratch. We want to go and run and bring them a plaster. I don't know where Keith is. I don't know how he's treated. Keith is 65 years old, and I know that the hostages are just there lying on a filthy, dirty mattress and waiting to be the next time they're going to be starved or touched or raped, and that's not the right way to live. So please, instead of being angry about what's happening in Israel, talk for love and bring all the Gaza people that are suffering too into their houses, back to their houses, and it should stop. Hamas is responsible to bring them home. They don't want to release Keith, and they don't want to release the hostages. Yeah. And for the Gaza people that live in Gaza to have a better life, Sinwar has to do that.
Aviva, we've got to leave it there, but I want you to know that there are many, many people messaging us in solidarity with you, sending you their best wishes today. Thank you for speaking to me.
let's remind ourselves of exactly what, as I say, incredibly, the police are calling. This is in their disclosure letter. That was the term I was looking for. So they have disclosed to Nicola Wilcox, who, by the way, is a well-known local figure in the Hare Hills district, a kind of community leader who's, is a pillar of the community. She came out in the middle of these riots to ask the police if they'd like some refreshment. And the ice lollies. It was a hot night, and is now being, at least is in the frame for racially aggravated abuse. But the thing is, well, I'll read it before we go to this footage, and I'll read out what it says here. Was arrested on suspicion of a racially aggravated Public Order Act offence. It is alleged that Ms Wilcox has left her address, which is close to a Romanian vigil. So she lives in the middle of this area. A Romanian vigil. She demonstrated and shouted words to the effects of "go home and you're devaluing property." I think she's pretty certain not to have said it in the way that they are maintaining. But anyway, the point is, this is to me is classic two-tier policing. This is the police trying to play down what was going on here. How this riot started, and it was a riot, it was not a vigil, unless you have a vigil that's lit not by candles but by a blazing bus, which they set fire to. It started when the local cops accompanied some social workers to the home of a Romanian traveller family where the parents were suspected of mistreating their kids. The local community, many of them Romanian travellers or of that ethnic derivation, erupted basically, and then it became a free-for-all. So the incredible thing here is that the police are calling this a Romanian vigil. Let's remind ourselves of what this Romanian vigil looked like.
Look, I've got him on camera throwing stuff. Look, got him.
And have we got the blazing bus? Have we got more of this? Yeah, while we talk, we're going to play more of these images, Isabel. But, I mean, as I say, this is it, isn't it? I mean, the police describing what we're seeing now. Look at this, look. The police describing this as a Romanian vigil. It's just ridiculous. It's ridiculous.
We are being gaslit by our own government. We are being asked to deny what we can see with our very own eyes. If this was a vigil, then I have no idea what you would call lawless behaviour. I mean, I was there some time after it happened, and you could still see the scorched tarmac from where a bus had been set on fire. So as you said, this is only a Romanian vigil if vigils involve not candles, but actually torching vehicles. And, you know, poor Nikki found herself hauled over the coals for, as you read out, for saying to the yobs that were there,
Oh, look, by the way, let me just interrupt you for a second. Sorry, Isabel, but here's one of the Romanian vigil people setting fire to the bus. So that's obviously part of the Romanian vigil ceremony. As I said to you earlier, this is not a candle-lit vigil, it's a bus-lit vigil. You saw the other fires. This area for 5 hours was a scene of mayhem and destruction and violence. And if you remember, the police pulled out for 5 hours and let them get on with it. And you can understand now, given that, why the police, who clearly, want to kowtow to this community, are describing it as a Romanian vigil. How dare they, frankly?
I mean, it is just astonishing that you could describe this as a vigil, and that she should be in trouble for saying, "Go home, you're devaluing property." to the Romanian crowd. Well, when she said go home, I suspect she meant actually go home down the road to your houses down the road. And, well, they demonstrably were devaluing property because a burnt-out bus is no good for bus journeys. So what she said there was perfectly true. But unfortunately, as far as the police are concerned, and I'm reading here from her, from the records of her arrest, that apparently caused them distress and made her the subject of their frustration. So her crime, if you like, her alleged crime, was to cause the Romanian rioters, because they're not having a vigil, are they?
Vigilers, they're having a vigil.
Yeah, it was to cause them distress. Are you kidding me? I mean, what about the distress that they're causing everybody as they're setting things alight and going on the rampage? How is it that this lovely lady, who is a pillar of her community and works so hard for the little children in that area who are from very, very deprived backgrounds with next to nothing, how is it that it was her that ended up getting carted off to the police station and being in trouble for causing distress to these Romanians who are having a vigil? It makes no sense whatsoever. And it is part of a broader picture of we the people being gaslit by our own government, who have clearly got an extraordinarily sinister agenda. And I find it deeply disturbing, and I know how very distressing this whole thing has been for Nikki.
Yeah.
It didn't just go away, by the way. She may not have been formally charged, but she had to carry out some form of bizarre community service, even though there was never anywhere near enough to actually make anything stick. But nonetheless, to make it go away, she had to do some atonement. It's unbelievable.
And you went up to Leeds to interview her, so let's remind ourselves, and I'm going to ask the viewers and the listeners, you have a look. This is Nicola Wilcox. Essentially, the police are sort of saying she's some kind of racist, white supremacist type. I saw, remember we played it on the show, you played the entire interview. It is absolutely crystal clear that this woman does not have a racist bone in her body.
Went out basically to give the two police I could see from my window some refreshments, basically a couple of ice pops, because I thought from the carnage from the night before, I thought that bus must still be so hot, and they've been standing there for hours.
Let's cast back to what happened after you offered the police the ice lollies. Mm-hmm. They didn't accept your gesture.
No, they were quite angry at my presence being there. To me. Because I'd never been in a police station before. And I didn't even know why I was there. I just thought they'll let me go in a minute.
I mean, and so, you know, she's had this hanging over her head ever since. And in a way, Isabel, this sort of, you know, this is a blight on her character. And she's actually, Nicola is well known. I mean, that is a deprived area. She's well known for helping local kids. She's known to all members of that community, whatever ethnic derivation, as you say, a pillar of the community. And, you know, she's white and she's working class. It seems that the police, if they see an ethnic riot, they pick on the white and the working class. There's something very strange about all this.
Very good morning to you, John.
Hello, good morning, mate.
We've been having a very lively conversation this morning about cabinet ministers taking money away from pensioners' heating allowances and then claiming their own second home heating allowance. But it seems the BBC, to a lesser extent, has wasted some licence payers' money on taxis, on trains and hotel bookings that were never used. 2,500 rail tickets, 324 rooms and 1,581 taxis paid for but cancelled, and they can't get refunds. So 235,000 quid down the Swanee.
Mike, look, this is a real non-story, this one, isn't it? This is all over 5 years. 79 hotel rooms cancelled between 19,000 people. You know, it's a Sun non-story. There are far bigger things you can.
Well, of course there are bigger things, but what it points to is that the BBC wastes money because it doesn't have to worry about it.
So does every organisation. You know,
well, we don't do it here.
Especially in the public sector, they always look. Let me tell you, when I was a kid researcher on Nationwide years ago, 40 years ago, there was a board in the middle of the room that told you the cost of everything. So this photograph would cost you that, that graphic will cost you that. Now, that should be in every BBC production office. I'm not sure if it is.
Yeah, and of course, because in most newspaper offices these days, you're not allowed to do things like that because there's simply, you know, there isn't the money. There's accountants saying, no, you can't do that. You can't pay for this, you can't pay for that. I mean, I know from personal experience, and you'll know this better than me, when I lived in Scotland and I'd go on BBC Newsnight Scotland, if I was in Linlithgow, which is a little town outside of Edinburgh, you know, they would pay me a fee, but the cost of the taxi to and from the studio was more than the fee. And I used to say to them, you know, I said, if you let me drive in and pay me the cost of the taxis, we can't do that, they said. The system says we have to send a car for you. So the fee for the appearance was about 100 quid. The taxis was about 150.
I know. I mean,
it's mad.
BBC and other things, you know, 200,000 to Huw Edwards, much worse. You know, all media organisations waste money. They all waste money. You know, even TalkTV. Now, what was far more interesting over the weekend, Mike, in terms of media stories, was I was amazed and shocked at how much Nigel Farage is paid.
Why?
He's paid 3,000 quid a show.
Yeah, well, actually, that's not what he says. He says that the money's paid to his company, and that's not a show fee necessarily. That's a contract that he's got with GB News, which is, of course, a private organisation. And the difference between, for example, him and Gary Lineker is that Gary Lineker's paid from the public purse, and that's why people have got such a focus on the news coming out of BBC land.
Gary Lineker gets 1.3, Farage gets 1.2 from
well, I know who I'd prefer to watch.
Well, no, I prefer Lineker, but, you know, it's good. All of these salaries...
Well, that's your choice, but unfortunately, you don't get to go to jail if you don't watch Nigel Farage and you don't wish to pay for it, whereas you do if you don't want to watch Gary Lineker.
I think nobody's gone to jail in the last few years. But
that's not true. There's loads of people going to jail every year.
Prove it, Mike. Prove it.
Prove it. Okay. Well, I will. It's always a bad thing to say, John, to me on this programme, because I'll find you statistics before the end of the interview to prove it. There are people getting locked up and prosecuted every single year by the BBC, in their hundreds, and in fact, some of them, most of them, are elderly women.
You tell me the numbers of elderly women who are locked up, you know, in the last.
Well, they shouldn't be locking up anyone. That's the point.
But look, all salaries should be out in the public. Your salary.
Why?
Everybody's salary.
I'm not paid by the public purse. Why should my salary be published?
Because transparency, total media transparency. I mean, how many hotel rooms has Talk not taken up? How many train tickets have you not taken?
Well, I bet you it's a lot less than the BBC. 235,000.
19,000 people, Mike. 19,000. You know, it's a national broadcaster. You know, but with all due respect, Talk is not a national broadcaster, nor is GB News. Of course, the thing.
No, but we are commercial organisations which rise and fall based upon commercial activity, and BBC doesn't have to worry about that, and that's why the BBC gets away with so much. That's how they can pay people ridiculous amounts of money for doing jobs which they would never get that money for elsewhere.
Look, I mean, the BBC should be much more commercial. I mean, they have an outfit called BBC Studios, which is where an awful lot of the commerce is done. And they're actually not... Do you know how much they contribute to the public sector, public service purse every year? £300 million, which is peanuts. I mean, their turnover is billions.
Well, you can say that's peanuts, but the people who listen to this show and who watch this show find these numbers absolutely staggering, and find that people get paid as much as they do get paid. They find it quite incredible.
I'm staggered at Farage's payment. I thought it was 600,000 a year. In fact, it's double that. You know,
well, he's a very popular man. You know.
Well, all right. He's getting his market price. So is Gary Lineker.
Well, Gary Lineker's not getting his market price because Gary Lineker gets paid by the public purse. And as I said, if he wanted to leave the BBC and get a job elsewhere, he wouldn't get that kind of money because he doesn't.
It's still a market. It's still a market. You know, believe me, I'm sure you'll find Gary Lineker is hawking himself around broadcasters, and I'm sure you'll find they'll be offering him a lot more money.
But when you consider the amount of work he does for the BBC, which is to pre-record a programme on a Saturday afternoon, for which he gets paid very handsomely, I think you'll find that whenever he does any other work for anybody else, he gets paid pro rata. So he doesn't get that kind of money because it's a very short amount of time they employ him for.
Mike, don't let facts get in the way of a good story.
Facts, I know you're not keen on facts, being a former BBC man.
Have you found?
But let me give you this. Let me give you the latest person that was locked up, right, by the BBC. A chronically ill grandmother was from West Belfast, jailed after not paying a TV licence. Anne Smith, her name is, from Polglass, was imprisoned after she did not pay a £1,100 court fine for failing to pay for her TV licence.
When was that?
Absolutely extraordinary.
When was that?
It was in the last couple of years.
Was the last couple of years? So how many other grandmothers and old ladies have been locked up?
You should be ashamed, John, that there's even one.
No, I mean, if you don't pay your car tax, you get locked up. You know, if you don't pay your council tax, you get locked up.
But you should not be locked up for not watching television, should you?
No, you're getting a service. You get a service.
No, but I can't believe you're not condemning this, John. I mean, we may have to ban you from the show for being completely outrageously ghastly.
Don't cancel me yet, Mike. No.
I have to cancel you unless you condemn this ridiculous ruling. You're not going to condemn sending an old grandmother chronically ill to prison.
The licence fee is an archaic system, and something needs to be done to bring it up to date. And you know my view. I think there should be a hybrid licence fee, £100. You get everything from the BBC, everything else you pay for the other side of the aisle.
They've locked up, right, since 1995. They've locked up in the BBC for not paying their TV licences very nearly 2,200 people. 1,444 men, 754 women. Absolutely outrageous.
What's the source of that? That's a false
Full
thing.
fact is the source of that.
What is?
Full fact. Yeah.
Well,
you're going to dispute that as well? Or?
The BBC doesn't lock people up. It's a
Well, they do. They've just locked up 2,100 of them. You asked me for proof. I've given it to you. Like all lefties, you can't accept it.
Mike, the BBC is not a police force. Well,
why are they locking people up then?
They don't lock people up.
They've just done it.
People don't pay their licence fees. They go to court and they usually get a little fine. Right, that figure of 2,000.
What else do they start locking people up for? Not watching EastEnders. We're going to punish you for not watching Strictly.
Not paying the council tax.
Not watching Strictly.
Not paying any other licence fees.
Unbelievable. You're a very bad man, John. You're a very bad man. I can't have this.
See you soon.
See you later. John Mayer, ex-BBC producer, doesn't think that locking up people for paying their TV licence is a bad thing. Amazing. Absolutely incredible.
Evening, Peter. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. There is polling to suggest that 2 in 5 people think that the country has got worse since Labour has been elected. What would you say to them?
Well, look, it's been 4 months of a Labour government after 14 years, and the thing I heard on the doorstep during the general election campaign is nothing works in this country. Now, in that climate, it's going to take time to fix it. But what I would say is, if you're a teacher in this country, if you're a nurse in this country, if you're a member of our armed forces, then for the first time in over a decade, you've actually had a real terms pay rise since we came to office. I mean, the armed forces, the biggest pay rise in 22 years. So I think that there are people in our society who are feeling better off right now. If you're a former mine worker that I was talking to the other day, you've had a 32% increase in your pension after we've ended the injustice of pensions. The investment in our NHS that's going to bring down the waiting list. There are people living in pain every single day. These are the things that we're trying to fix. It's been 4 months. So much is there to be fixed. We're getting on with the job. I don't resolve the fact people will not feel necessarily better off at the moment, but we're only 4 months into the change that this country needs.
Okay, you've made, as you've pointed out there in that answer, You've certainly given money to the armed forces, you've given money to public sector workers, you have given money to train drivers, for example, some of whom work for ASLEF, not all of them, but some of whom who work for ASLEF who have got a 15% rise. Junior doctors have got 22% rise. But you've also made other forms of decisions, including taking money away from pensioners in the winter through the Winter Fuel Allowance. And your own figures, government's own figures in the last 48 hours, show that 100,000 pensioners will be put into fuel poverty as a result of those numbers. Now, even let's not even think about those 100,000 people just for a second, but all this entire policy could be reversed if you give £1.4 billion to it. That's not a lot of government money. Why do people need to perhaps make a decision not to put on the heating this summer because of that policy, simply because you can't find £1.4 billion?
Well, there's two elements to that policy. The first is whether you should means test a benefit. And I'll make no apology for the fact that I think you should means test a benefit. I don't think wealthy people should be getting handouts in an economic crisis like the one we're seeing. The second part to it, though, and I absolutely agree with this, is that where, and your last caller, in fact, was talking about this, is where that threshold is low. Now, I've spoken to ministers about what we can do about raising that threshold, and I continue.
But you voted for this policy, Jonathan.
I did, and I'll be absolutely clear as to why. Because at the same time as this policy was coming in, and the figures that you quote there don't take account of this, we've also put another £1 billion into the Household Support Fund. We're putting investment into the Warm Home Plan that was just announced today. There was £1 million going into Hartlepool through the Household Support Fund this winter. There's £500 million been agreed today with the energy companies to support people. Those are all measures targeted at people around that threshold who need them help. And added to that, I just added one more thing. I really need to say this, is that one of the things that we've been driving in Hartlepool is getting pensioners the entitlements, the benefits that they deserve. We've already brought in £100,000 more in support for pensioners in Hartlepool as a result of having those drop-in sessions.
Jonathan, I just want you to listen to a caller who was on with me about 2 hours ago. Her name is Teresa. She lives in Leicester and she actually receives the Winter Fuel Allowance. This is what she had to tell me. I spoke to Teresa from Leicester. She's an elderly pensioner. She's got health conditions. I asked her if she's going to put her heating on today, where it is 1 degree centigrade in Leicester. This is what she told me. I asked her, are you going to put your heating on?
No, I won't turn it on. Because even with the fuel allowance, it's not enough to keep you warm all year. It's horrible. Absolutely horrible.
Teresa, I am so sorry that you have to make these choices. I'm so sorry.
I know, but it's about time they woke up and realised. I mean, I worked for 47 years. I wish I'd never.
47 years as someone who paid her taxes, paid her pension contributions. She receives the Winter Fuel Allowance. She's clearly someone and will continue to do so, and that means that she is on a low income. Jonathan, I presume you didn't come into politics to have to realise that there are people in this country who, even with Labour's policies, are living like that every day.
It's completely unacceptable. There's no sugarcoating that. That's completely unacceptable. You say yourself, she's actually continuing to receive the Winter Fuel Allowance. We've got some of the worst home insulation in the country, some of the highest energy prices in Europe. We have to completely reform the system. It was completely ridiculous that anybody in the 21st century is living like that. It is the government's responsibility to fix it.
But what you voted for, Jonathan, what you personally voted for is to take away money from people like Teresa. That's what you did when you voted for the Winter Fuel Allowance. Do you accept that?
But Teresa does continue to receive the Winter Fuel Allowance.
Yeah, but there are people living on even less than her. She has got the Winter Fuel Allowance and she will struggle to heat her home. There will be people who don't receive it who will really struggle as well and will have lost it. By your own figures, by the Labour government's own figures, 100,000 people in fuel poverty as a result of what you voted for, Jonathan.
We took a decision to means test it, but we also put other things in place. So, for example, we've just increased the state pension by 2.5 times the rate of inflation. We put £1 billion more into the Household Support Fund. It's about the Warm Homes Fund that we're getting, the £500 million that we're getting from the UK energy suppliers today for low-income households. These are the measures that we need to take. But do you know what? Here's somebody you've had on your show today who gets the winter fuel allowance, and it's not enough. We have to radically change this country in terms of our energy security. You know, when the energy crisis hit, British families lost 9% of their disposable income. In France, it was 3%. Why? Because we don't have the energy security we need in this country. We're exposed to things like happening in Ukraine.
Why do you think? I don't really want to get into an argument necessarily about net zero, but what our viewers and listeners see, I'll just tell you what they see, and they tell me this all the time, and I've got hundreds of messages today, I've got many phone calls from people really concerned about people like Theresa, and what they see, Jonathan, is your government within the last four months. I know you've talked about the Conservatives, and that's fine and that's okay, I get that. But within 4 months, what they've done is they've taken away the Winter Fuel Allowance. They've sent 470 people to a climate change conference in Baku. They've put in the inheritance tax things on the farmers. There just seems to a lot of our viewers and listeners that your government, the party that you're part of in power, doesn't care about a lot of people in this country. We've seen the evidence of 40% of people thinking the country is worse off since Labour has been elected. I want to fairly interview you and tell you and ask you what you have to say to those people.
Well, what I say to those people is that if we're going to fix our public services, if we're going to get that it's 7 million people currently living in pain off a waiting list, we're going to have to invest in it. If we're going to rebuild the crumbling schools in this country, we're going to have to invest in it. We heard last week Kemi Badenoch, the leader of the Conservative Party, say that she agreed with all of the investment in the budget, the schools, the NHS, everything, but she doesn't say how she wants to pay for it. And that's the difference between being in opposition and government. If you want to do things, you have to have an actual plan where you pay for it. Now, everyone is going to disagree with different decisions in that budget, and there are losers in that budget. I'd love it. I'd love a country where you could just raise money from thin air so nobody had to pay for anything and we had world-class public services.
But when you see things, Jonathan, when you see things like a foreign aid budget, I'm not saying we shouldn't necessarily do foreign aid, but what I am saying is that we should look after people at home. You're seeing a foreign aid budget of 13 or 14 billion. You're seeing money to Ukraine for 3 billion. That's fine, and it would be nice to be able to do those things. But actually, we've got pensioners who are freezing, who a bit more money to them would make a huge difference. I'm not talking about loads and loads of money. 1.4 billion, for example, in the case of the entire budget of this country, is not an awful lot of money.
I mean, look, I think that's a completely fair point, and I don't mind talking about those things in the round and where we could tweak budgets here. So it's a perfectly reasonable debate. On Ukraine, look, all I would say is our action in Ukraine and preventing Russia being on NATO's borders, I think, is very much in the interests of the people of this country, pensioners and everybody else. We don't want Russia marching through Europe. That is not something that I think is in anyone's interest. In terms of foreign aid budgets, yeah, I get it. And do you know what the most disgraceful thing is? After the last government, a lot of that foreign aid budget is actually being used in this country to house the asylum seekers. You know, when we left office in 2010, there were 14,000 people on an asylum waiting list. In June this year, there was 224,000. Think of the waste of money on that.
Well, you have Dame Angela Eagle, who is the Border Security Minister in the government.
I was in the comments when she said it.
Yeah, well, you will know then that she has talked about the number of hotels housing asylum seekers, 220 of them, more than the 213 4 months ago. Now, we're in a situation where there are 220 hotels in this country where people who, you know, I'm sure they can be assessed, I'm sure they can be processed. Some of them will be genuine asylum seekers. Let's face it, Jonathan, some of them won't, but they can switch on the heating, they can get good hot food, and people like Theresa can't. That is not fair.
The system that we have got in this country around asylum is a complete and total disgrace. It is a broken system that we're trying to fix. We've had the largest flights ever of deportations out of this country, nearly 10,000 people deported since we came to office. I don't want a single asylum seeker in a single hotel. You know, I was in the Commons when Dame Angela Eagle said that, and, you know, Richard Tice from Reform actually made the point that under the last Labour government, these waiting lists didn't exist. We processed the applications quickly and only 20% of applications were ever granted. That's what we've got to get back to, because that's value for money for the taxpayer. We cannot waste the amount of money that we've inherited from the Conservatives. They completely broke the system. I'll say it again. 14,000 people on a waiting list for asylum when we left office. 224,000 when the Tories left office. It's an absolute disgrace that we've got to fix.
OK, Jonathan, just briefly, I just want to ask you about John Prescott, who is the former Deputy Prime Minister for the Labour Party. Lord Prescott, he has died at the age of 86. Many people reflecting on his legacy today. What are your thoughts?
I mean, first of all, I was desperately sad to hear that he had passed away today. John was a titan of the Labour movement. He was somebody... He wasn't New Labour at all. He actually came from a much more traditional aspect of the Labour Party, but he understood the need to modernise and change, because only by being in government can you serve the British people. And he embodied that. He was a ferocious debater who someone I wouldn't have wanted to have to stand across the dispatch box from. He did an amazing job, not only for our party in terms of modernising and changing it and ensuring it could get back into government, but he also did an incredible job in government as well. And, look back now at all those arguments he used to have about devolving power to the regions. He was way ahead of his time, because that's what both parties now agree you have to do, is what we have been doing. And he was on that in the North East. He wanted that for the North East, and we've got it now. But he was a man ahead of his time, and I think he's a great loss.
The thing, rightly or wrongly, that he will always be remembered for was that punch. And certainly that's been replayed today on many occasions. What do you think his legacy will be beyond that? Because that's the most memorable thing people will be thinking about today. People who are perhaps not political nerds like you and me, thinking about all the different things he did in government.
Well, I'll just say very briefly on that. I think most people would respect the fact that when he was attacked, he didn't cower, he fought back, and it may not have been the best way of doing it as a politician, but I respect his vigour and his honesty for doing it. Look, as I say, his legacy will be, from the Labour Party's perspective, he was an absolute architect of modernising the Labour Party to get it back into office. And then once the Labour Party was back in office, he was an architect of that government that delivered so much for so many people. He's changed so many lives as a result of his incredible work in politics. And as I say, he's a titan of our party, and he'll be greatly missed.
This was people trying to keep us misinformed, and I think the judge made the right decision to put that information out there. I think that information should have been out there day one. If it had been, you wouldn't have had the protests, you wouldn't have had the misinformation, you wouldn't have had the community tension, you wouldn't have had armed police officers going on strike. All of these things could have been avoided if matters had been put out there day one. That, I would respectfully say to the defence barrister, is what is in the public interest. Jeremy Dean?
Peter and Mr Tice, all I would say is this. Had I been instructed to defend Sergeant Blake, I would have done it with all my heart and soul. That is my occupation. And those who prosecute would have prosecuted, and I know the individual concerned did, fairly and appropriately. This is a situation in which a police officer shot someone in the head and that person died. The IOPC/CPS could have determined there was insufficient evidence to charge, but they didn't. They determined there was insufficient. Unless we have respect for the criminal justice process, then we're moving in the direction of...
Hold on a second.
People who come out, whoever they may be, and I stress I'm not personalising this, but people who come out and attack the criminal justice process and attack the decisions of the CPS and attack defence lawyers and attack judges without having witnessed the proceedings are risking the public...
But the point is,
it's confidence in the criminal justice
nonsense.
process.
It's exactly the opposite. Actually, it's a complete failure of dealing with the public interest. What you're essentially saying is we cannot criticise the IOPC. We cannot criticise the CPS. That is what you're saying, and I think that is absolutely shameful.
I'm not saying that.
That's exactly what you're saying.
I criticise the CPS every day of the week. That's what I've made my living out of.
Well, then why can't I?
Years.
Why can't I? Why only you?
You can.
And that's what I'm doing. And you're preventing me from doing that. You're trying to say I shouldn't do that.
I know. I'm not taking
It's exactly what you're doing.
no, forgive me. I'm not taking issue with your approach as a matter of principle. I'm saying that on the substance of what you are saying, on the substance of it, you are wrong. Of course you can make criticism if you so wish, but I vehemently disagree with what you are saying, and I'm stressing that I feel that if you were more familiar with the evidence and...
I am now familiar with the evidence because I've read it today. What is the evidence that you read it today?
That's
okay. Hold on a second, Jeremy. Let me ask you. I'm trying not to take a side in either of you here.
Sure.
Let me ask you, what is that you have read in the transcripts that Richard and I perhaps haven't? What is it that you've seen that makes you think the CPS acted appropriately in putting this through? And are you honestly saying? I know you're not here to defend the CPS, but are you honestly saying that there's no possibility of an element of pressure, thought about the public protests that have been there, any other element in this that would have made them think, actually, we should prosecute this?
Can I make this clear? What the point I raised with Mr. Tice was whether he had read the transcripts or followed the detail. And he has very fairly indicated, and it's inevitable, that he has effectively followed the matter today or recently, and that's fine. What I am saying is, no, Peter, I do not think that these proceedings emanate from any element of public pressure or anything like that. I mean, I am a defender. I want to keep stressing that. I'm not here to defend the CPS or the IOPC. I actually have very serious criticisms of the IOPC in a number of respects more generally. I am simply saying, from all I know of the case, and I have spoken personally to counsel in the case at considerable length about it, that in my view, there was sufficient evidence for the officer to be charged. We have a jury system in this country. The jury heard the evidence. They acquitted Sergeant Blake. We must respect that verdict. But I think to attack the criminal justice process as a consequence of what has taken place is wrong and unjust. And it's a dangerous thing because the public need to respect the criminal justice system, not to lack confidence.
But the fact is, Jeremy, I'll go back to Richard in a second, but the fact is, Jeremy, that often people do not respect the criminal justice process because they make their mind up based on what they know. They won't necessarily have read every jot and tittle of what happens, but it is perfectly reasonable to have some detail, to have some information, perhaps not every single bit of information, and have an opinion based on that, which may not be favourable towards the CPS.
Well, the trouble is, Peter, I don't know what Mr. Tice's field of expertise is. I'm sure he's expert in his occupation and he's an esteemed politician. But if you're not a lawyer, I don't mean this patronisingly in any way, but if you're not a lawyer, you're not qualified as a member of the public to form a proper assessment of the correctness or otherwise of decisions made in proceedings as grave as this. You have to be a lawyer to do that. That's the truth of the matter.
Richards?
What you're actually saying is that that a jury, therefore, is not qualified because you're essentially saying we're too thick, we're too stupid. Far from it. Actually, there's two elements to this. One is that if the information about this individual's character had been out there day one, the public had not been misinformed but told the truth, then community relations would not have been so tense. That the police force would not have lost confidence in the IOPC and the CPS. And the whole of London, frankly, Londoners would be in a better position. That's point number one. Point number two is, if the jury can work it out, in less than 3 hours the evidence wasn't good enough, why on earth can't the experts at the IOPC and the CPS work it out as well? They failed in their duty to make a proper, correct judgment early doors. That's the reality.
Can I just deal with those 2 points? You put them very clearly. If I may just deal with those 2 points, they are important points. On the first point that you've made, on the point about why the IOPC couldn't work out what the jury did, the test was different. For the IOPC and the CPS in particular, they have to decide, in effect, whether there is a case to answer. The jury does not have to make that determination. The jury has to decide whether they are sure of guilt. They are two different tests. So the jury are not considering the case in the same way as the IOPC are considering it. The threshold is very different indeed. And the second point is quite simply this. Of course, I represent members of the public day in and day out. But, Mr. Tice, the jury were given legal directions by the judge. They were given a legal framework in which to make their determination. Members of the public who feel strongly, who are not happy, who are dissatisfied, who criticise, don't have that legal framework in which... So you need to be a lawyer, or you need to be instructed by a lawyer, in my view, in order to properly consider the correctness of decisions made, and in the end, the jury were given a legal framework and they reached their verdict.
But there's one other point, which is...
A final thought from both of you. We're just running out of time. Richard.
Yeah, actually, what the IPC and CPS have to do is they have to conclude that there is a reasonable prospect of conviction. And quite clearly, the jury determined, having looked at the same evidence, that there wasn't.
But, Mr. Tice, that's the criminal justice system.
But we want a competent IPC and CPS to stop wasting people's time and stop putting serving brave police officers through absolute torture and hell unnecessarily.
All right, well, my final thought is quite simply this. My final thought is that when person A kills person B, if there is evidence capable of leading a jury to determine that that was an unlawful killing, whether it be a politician, a barrister, a police officer, whomsoever, there ought to be criminal proceedings. In this case, you and I disagree as to whether there should have been criminal proceedings or not. Gladly, from Mr. Sergeant Blake's point of view, the jury acquitted. In my view, this was the criminal justice system working very effectively. You take a different view. We could go on for a very long time debating this.
You certainly could, and thank you both very much. A very spirited and interesting debate. Thank you, Richard Tice MP, Deputy Leader of Reform UK, MP for Boston and Skegness, and also Jeremy Dean, King's Counsel, KC, Criminal Defence Barrister.
Freedom of speech means that you should be able to criticise religion. And we do criticise religion in this country all the time, don't we? Although criticising and laughing about and mocking Christianity, absolutely fine and acceptable. Even, it would appear, according to the Metropolitan Police, blatant anti-Semitism appears to be acceptable these days, outrageously. But when it comes to one particular religion, that appears to be a problem. And we've seen this, have we not, with the Batley Grammar School teacher who just simply was discussing the issue of the Mohammed cartoons when he was basically forced into hiding by a mob threatening his death. We've also seen it with a film about Mohammed's wives, to mobs of people outside cinemas. We've seen it in many, many different cases. And now we've seen a Labour MP standing up in the House of Commons and asking Keir Starmer to bring in a blasphemy law to stop the desecration of religious texts and abuse of the prophets of Christianity, Islam and Judaism. Let's talk about this with Mohammed Amin. He's former chairman of the Conservative Muslim Forum and joins us now. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Julia.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us. I have to say I was really shocked when I saw this. This is Tahir Ali. He's a Labour MP for Birmingham, Hall Green and Moseley. And he urged action, cautioning about the acts of mindless desecration that risk fueling division and hatred within our society. Should we or should we not have a blasphemy law? Because I have to say, Keir Starmer's answer was pretty, I don't know, should we say vague on whether or not he agreed or disagreed with the blasphemy law?
Well, first of all, Julia, I agree with you. Keir Starmer was vague, and I think he was trying to avoid upsetting anybody, which...
That's the trouble,
sometimes it's sensible, sometimes it's not sensible. I think he should have given a clear lead, and my view, categorically, is we should not have any blasphemy law.
Yeah, it's really very simple, isn't it? It's like sort of, you know, the American flag, and people get upset about people burning the American flag. I don't think it's a good thing to do, to burn a nation's flag, whether it's yours or anyone else's, but I don't think it should be illegal. I mean, certainly, I wouldn't dream of damaging or burning any book at all. I would be horrified by that, let alone a religious text that was meaningful to other people. That would be simply because of matter of public decency and politeness, I would have thought. But I would defend the right of anyone to do so if they felt necessary to do so. And what is fascinating is we've actually had some people who, in other countries, I mean, Sweden has been battling this, Denmark, other countries, where we're actually talking about people who have left, in particular, the religion of Islam, and they have, you know, burnt, desecrated the Quran, and they have faced death threats. We've had threats of fatwas from Muslim-dominated, Muslim-majority countries as well. But this only seems to happen with one religion. Mocking the Bible, mocking, you know, the Old Testament, you know, the texts for Judaism. No, apparently that's absolutely fine. It's only one particular religious book and only one particular prophet that this is an issue for.
Well, first of all, I agree with you. Burning, desecrating other people's religious texts is silly, it's downright rude, but there's no way it should be illegal. If you want to burn a book, provided you own the copy and you're not creating a fire hazard or a smoke hazard, that's up to you. It's just silly behaviour. And the question of who gets upset most, I mean, at the moment, most of the famous incidents that we're aware of have involved Muslims, but I'm sure you could find people of other religions who would also get extremely upset if you desecrated their religious texts in front of them.
I think also, I mean, like the extreme sort of right, the Christian right in America, I think we have some instances about their view on the Bible. Yeah, but in this country, the only instances I'm aware of are in relation to the Quran and to Prophet, the Muslim Prophet Muhammad, and that's where it becomes an issue, because this MP says, look, this is causing division and hatred, but we are effectively living with a blasphemy law de facto already, are we not? Because people who would defend the right to do that simply don't do it because they see what happens to the Batley Grammar School teacher. We've got a case in France right now, Samuel Paty, who was hunted down and beheaded because of what he did in his lessons in France. No insult intended, but he was beheaded. We saw what happened to those, Charlie Hebdo, for putting a cartoon of Mohammed on. We know what the outcome is. That's a de facto blasphemy law anyway, isn't it?
Timothy Garton Ash calls it, I think, the assassin's veto. Such behaviour is entirely wrong. I think it needs to be punished, but also Muslim religious leaders need to give a clearer, categorical statement themselves that this is entirely wrong. There are plenty of Muslims who have written saying absolutely there is no need for any kind of blasphemy rules anywhere in the world. There's a very famous article book called God Needs No Defense. The leader of Indonesia's largest Muslim organisation, the largest Muslim organisation in the world, came out categorically against blasphemy about 20 years.
But again, those voices perhaps don't get heard in some of the debate here. Mohammed Amin, thank you for joining us, former chair of the Conservative Muslim Forum.
I've been telling you this since the top of the show, and delighted to be joined by our next guest, Mo Saflo, a Syrian refugee who has since over 13 years got British citizenship, worked really hard, paid his taxes. Going to give us a real insight into why he left Syria and what has happened to that country. Mo, a very good afternoon to you. Welcome to Talk Drive.
Hello, good afternoon, Jeremy. How are you?
Really good. Thank you for this. I just wanted to do it differently because you can do this all day in the same way. What I'd love you to do is share with the viewers and the listeners your story. Your journey began in 2011 when the revolution erupted. Take us from that point, my friend.
Well, the revolution started March 2011. I was 16 at the time. The military started really being cruel. Started taking us all to military despite the age. At the time, my city was a bit safe than other side of the countries like Homs. You got Damascus and Hama. 2012, that's when I went out, decided to leave. I was 17 at the time. Living in Syria was one of the toughest decisions I've ever taken, really. It wasn't easy, leaving my mom, leaving my dad. At 17 years old, I was only a boy, only a child. Leaving my family behind, leaving everyone's behind is not that as easy.
And this was, if I can just slow it down, because at 17, the pressure to join an army that was turning into something that you found abhorrent, if you hadn't done that, you'd have been thrown into prison, and your family would say to you, however difficult this is, go somewhere safe.
Yeah, of course. So the day I left, I remember my dad getting a call from someone high up in military saying we start recruiting regardless of the age or circumstances. And so when I left, it was quite difficult because they have no excuse. That's it. They have they would not care about what your situation is, if you are ill, not ill, or right, not in the age of going as well. Because at the time, if you are against the government, if you are from cities that well known to be against the government, you were treated really, really badly.
And in
my
terms
family-
of, well, I was going to say, in terms of the war, and in terms of after you'd escaped, and we'll talk about you in the UK in a bit, what impact did Assad's regime have on your family over the years, Mo?
It's been really hard. It's been really tough on my family, on my friends, of everyone I know, on myself as well. Even if I'm here, my dad was in prison for 4 months. At the beginning of the war, I remember my dad when he went out. I mean, we paid so much money, we begged so many people just to help us to get my dad out. And when he did get out, finally, he was a completely different person. He suffered and experienced so many pain and torture that he told me stories about, just scarred him for life. I lost so many friends through the war, some cousins, financial struggles, obviously due to the economy failure and then collapsing. It wasn't on anyone at all, really.
And Assad, I don't want to call him anything other than that, ruled with an iron rod. I read earlier he carried out, they believe, a genocide of 600,000 of his own people. We've seen images here at the weekend of small kids walking out of prisons. He was propped up by Russia on a daily basis for the last how many years. Your family and millions of Syrians have lived in fear of this man.
Of course. I mean, they say it's 600,000, but we believe in more. Way more than that. And not only death, but a lot of people are missing. Now they're trying to find a lot of prisoners that have been held at Sednaya prison, which is, they call it the Red Prison. There are like 5 floors under the ground, and they're trying since a few days until now. There is the Iron Press, which is basically a scrub yard, but for humans.
I think why I wanted to do this was, I think it's really easy just to have commentators on and correspondence, but to hear it. And let's just do this early. So at 17, faced with being in the army, which you disagreed with and it was so violent, your family helped you escape. They were punished as a result. I just want to make a point, and I hope you understand what I'm going to say to you. One of the things that annoys an awful lot of people in this country, and I think rightly, and let me get to the end of sentence, is people that come to this country who are not escaping a war-torn country, who come here as economic migrants, take advantage, try to change everything about the United Kingdom. You are the shining example. You came here on your own with nothing. You worked tirelessly, sometimes holding 3 jobs just to make ends meet, and you earned British citizenship because you gave something back, and more than anything, you were escaping a war-torn country, weren't you?
Yeah, I have indeed. The day I arrived here, as soon as I got my 5 years visa, straight away the next day I start getting a job. I've worked since that day till today, paying my taxes, paying my dues towards the citizen and the country. I have given an opportunity. It's great opportunity from the UK and the people of the UK. I cannot really thank him enough. I cannot thank the UK or the people of the UK enough for this opportunity that I didn't have in my own country. I did work hard enough. I've tried to do something for myself and prove people wrong, because I do experience a lot of people saying about the refugees and the way they do it, which is I disagree with the way they're doing it.
Well, I was going to say, I hope you wouldn't mind me asking this, because I will shout your corner forever, because you are exactly, in my humble opinion, I'm an old man, you are exactly the sort of person that we should be doing something about, but I'd like, and helping. I'd like your take, because it's a fact, whether the bedwetter's accepted or not, that there are hundreds of thousands of young men who 12 miles out from our coast throw their passports in the water. They come here without their wives and children. They haven't escaped a war-torn country. They come here because we're soft. We're soft to migrants, and then they disappear into our society. You've worked 3 jobs. You've earned citizenship. We'll talk about your desire to go home in a minute. What do you make of those people, Mo?
I totally disagree with the way they are doing it, actually. I totally disagree. People coming over here just claiming benefits and being on what do you call it? Whatever, the claiming benefits and being a gym centre, I totally disagree with it. I've seen a lot of people, I know a lot of people where they do that, work cash in hand and claim benefits, when UK should actually look after their own people. Again, that's an opportunity they've given them, which is some people taking advantage of it in a wrong way, unfortunately.
Watching what happened this weekend must have been so many different emotions, and I guess that now he has gone, the barbaric Assad, propped up by Russia down one of his little tunnels to flee like a rat. You're desperate to go home, right?
I am indeed. I am. It still feels unreal. It doesn't feel reality at all. I feel like I'm in a dream, and I wake up some days thinking, man, no, it's a dream and I might be over, and Assad's still in control. I am desperate to go home. Syria, it's a lovely country, ruled by a brutal regime, a dictatorship that's been there for over 20 years, and his dad been there for over, I think, as well, 25 years, in total of 55 years, both of them. I want to go home to visit at least for a while, but potentially we'll be moving permanently, hopefully, once Syria is built, when it feels the right time. It's gonna take a while to get there. We're gonna face a lot of difficulties in the way, but I believe we can do it. I believe we can do it.
Many people have been saying over the last 24, 48 hours that the dictatorship, thank God, is gone, that this madman is no longer. But what comes next in a political and religious vacuum is almost as scary. Where do you stand on that?
I totally disagree from that point, to be honest with you. The rebels have been controlling my city, Idlib, where they are been there for over 10 years now, since 2015. And what they've done for the city has been incredible. They worked really good for them. They started wrong, but now they worked right. They're doing right now. I've seen a lot of videos from Aleppo when we have Christians, we have some of the religions in the city, and they treating them with respect and caring for them and protecting them.
And for you, I mean, I guess 13 years away has been incredibly challenging. What thing, you must have missed a lot of family stuff, lots of stuff.
I have, unfortunately. I have. My sisters got married, both of them, which is, I've been here, I couldn't attend. My grandma passed away, most of my loved ones passed away, and it's just been devastating. My parents aging every day without me being there. It's quite painful, really.
But for you now, although a British citizen, absolutely earned, a desire to return as soon as possible. Any idea when that will be possible, if it's going to be possible? What are your thoughts?
Well, I can't really give you a time frame of when. It's all about if they do it right. They have an opportunity now to build a country, and I hope they use it for their advantage to build it right. Of course, with the help of the Syrian people, with the help of the world, and I hope with the UK as well, and all the other countries. I hope in the next 4 to 5 years I'll be back if the country is built right. Maybe sooner if I have the opportunity. I'm not sure yet. But I will be visiting very soon.
That's so good to hear. And just very quickly, 2 final things. Your family, I guess you've spoken to them in the last few days. We've seen pictures. What is the feeling on the ground in Syria? What is the feeling as Assad fled?
They're absolutely happy. I mean, everyone I've spoken to, they're absolutely happy. My sister's husband, he's from Homs. As soon as Homs been freed, he went way straight to see his mom. He came to Idlib, to my city, when he was 18 years old, and the guy is almost 30 now as well. Haven't seen his mom in all that long. So the happiness is everywhere. That people just cannot believe it. Honestly, it feels like a dream still until now.
I have to say, mate, it's an absolute honour to have had you on, and I mean that because I stand by my criticism of many migrants because I believe we're a soft touch, but I also stand by what made this country great, which, and we've proven it with the Ukrainians, is when somebody is escaping a war-torn country like you, and you come here and you accept our culture and our identity, and you work and you pay tax and you earn British citizenship. That's good for me. There's only one thing I've got to take umbrage with you on, I'm afraid. Ryan as a friend. You need to improve your choice of friends, though, Mo, really. That's slightly dodgy.
No, he's one of my best friends. He's one of my good friends.
I was going to say you need to look higher, but he's so bloody tall, you probably get a crink in your neck.
Yeah,
Mo Saflo, thank you for coming on. This is Talk Drive.